Good morning, potato chips. How you doing? We Paddy from across the shuck, and this is a rant video, but it's not going to be an angry rant video. It's just going to be a video about me venting off because sometimes I hear such twaddle talked in the knife community, and I know that's going to be controversial, but including myself, sometimes I talk the biggest lot of tripe. And sometimes you need to just sit back and do like I've done this morning. I picked a couple of knives up. It started with two knives, these two here, and it grew to this, and I've some up here to bring into it. It's going to last a long time. Get a cup of tea and sit down if you want, or watch it in episodes. I don't care. But I just feel that I've got to just do this. I've got to answer some of the mythy questions that I keep hearing on YouTube and some of the statements. And I just want to prove that most of them are just people's opinions, like I'm having now. And don't get angry with people for having their opinion. By all means, have a gentleman's argument. Agree to disagree. Talk about it. But don't fall out over it. Because, I mean, this is my hobby. I don't want to fall out with anybody. I have done and I've gotten involved. And this might be another one. But what I wanted to talk about is intellectual properties, copying clones, copying blade shapes. Look, let's get realistic, right? We live in a very modern age where people have a lot of spare cash than what they ever done before. We are so far ahead of the people who came before us as far as spare cash, even for the cheapest knives. You know, these £30 knives. This one just happened to be a twisted assisted. It's a modern making of a classic clip point knife in a Lanny's clip shape, which Tony Bowes made really popular. Did Tony Bowes invent the Lanny's clip? No, I don't believe he did. Because Tony Bowes, one of Tony Bowes' major things, and what people loved him for, is he went back in time, brought patterns that were made years upon years ago, maybe 100 years ago, and brought that pattern back to life, that blade shape back to life. That was Tony Bowes' genius, was looking back and then bringing them knives into the modern era. And he spent his whole life doing it and teaching people how to do it and having rules that he stuck by. So, and then I hear people talking about the Buck, you know, the Buck is this be all and end all. And yes, Buck made absolutely brilliant knives. I bought one, so I must think so, or I'm stupid. You know, if you're buying something that you don't think is good, you're stupid. It doesn't matter what price it is. If you're buying it just for the sake of the knife, to me, in my opinion, that's a pointless exercise. Why are you going to keep it? Probably not. The knives that I have kept in my collection are the ones that I truly like. But Buck make a fantastic knife, don't get me wrong, absolutely fantastic. And what I've got is 4 clip points and 4 drop points, because they're so from the same family. It's unbelievable. There's not that much difference between a drop point and a clip point. Not much at all. But I just want to step back in time a bit. When knives made hundreds of years ago, all our pocket knives are derived from fixed blade knives. And that's why people love collecting fixed blade knives, because they can go back and have a recreation of something that our forefathers built houses with, worked with, cut their food with, skinned animals with. They used it for everything. They were working tools. They didn't walk about flashing their knife thinking it was brilliant. Everybody had one. And if you could afford a really good one, brilliant. There was always rich and poor. There's always been rich and poor. There's always been a battle about, look at that bloke, he's making that knife for half the price of this knife, but this is much better. Yes, it might be, but the other person's just making it for it's in his pay grade, and he can sell it to people who can't afford to buy this. I mean, that's just commerce, right? Intellectual property, stealing intellectual properties. If you want to get down to the bastard, I've used this before, the person who invented the wheel, if he lived now, there would only be one wheel made by one company, because he would just, he would make it his. So if you can't just go through life thinking, oh, people are copying, people are doing it. Yes, they do it. Of course they do. Because usually when something comes out that's good, people will buy it, and they'll buy a premium for a better made knife, for better blade steels, for better handle materials than they will a cheaper one, because it gives them a bit of credit. We, as human beings, we want the best we can afford. That's what I think. And I can't afford £1,000 pocket knife. Do I want £1,000 pocket? Yes, because I'm a collector, but I can't afford one. I'm never going to have one. It's not in my pay grade, but I can look at them and admire them. But there's nothing special about them. I sort of set my limit now, and it's gone up from when I started. I'm not buying knives over £300 anymore, unless it's something really special and I can save for a while. It's within my reach. I'm not getting into debt for it. I'm not going overboard. I'm not going to touch the bread on the family's table. Right? But all our modern knives now all come from a simple fixed blade, a drop point. Here's one. This is a drop point. Hundreds of years old, because they were made. And don't forget, when you go back in time and you're looking at what you're getting, these were forged with a hammer and a bit of metal. They were hand forged and hardened. And, some blacksmith somewhere, was making knives. And he was usually a horse, he was a blacksmith. I don't know why I said that, but he was a blacksmith, but he made knives as a sideline and sold them to get that extra couple of it while he was shoeing horses and doing all that and doing leather work and doing. So they all come from years gone by before we ever got to the folding stick. We had the fixed stick, and you had lots of different blade shapes, because two knives were never the same, because it was a bit of metal being hammered by a hammer to get it into shape and turn it, and just so they were never the same. They started off basically the same, but then people added a wee swedge to them, or a wee twist in the blade to sweep it up a bit more, or a leaner straight down, no belly. They were usually made for a purpose and not for collectors like myself. And this is where you have to realize, like, we're a very small majority of the knife world. There's not that many people spend as much money as we do on knives. Knives that will, never wear out. But when they made one knife, they used it till it was wore out, and then they got another one. We are just this world now. We have so much money, we can afford to do things like this, whether it's cheap ones. Don't forget, there was poor people in the past. They had to buy poor knives, so they got the bad blade steels, but they still had to work. And that's my whole point. We get caught up. And you had the fixed blades, but you had all different size. Like the wee bird and trout knives, they used them for pigeons or whatever they were eating. It was usually to do with food, skinning something, getting a fish and skinning it. You don't want a big knife. You wanted knives, so they adjusted. There's a beautiful clip point. Look at that little clip point on that bird and trout. This is a modern make one, but it's off an older model. It's been copied. Copying is part of growth. It's part of trying to make something better and trying to make something your own. And when you've run out of blade shapes to copy, then you go to handle shapes, and you get all sorts of weird handle shapes. You get different materials that you use to make yours different from the next person, so that you could charge more money. And that is the whole crux of it, is money. Somebody who's making something to sell wants his to sell the most off, and he also wants it to be the most expensive he can get out of it, because it's his livelihood. So there's where this came from. But I just wanted to show that there's subtle differences in a lot of knives. Yes, they all look like some knife in some way. And I'm going to show, now these are traditionally made knives. This is GECs, two GECs, 174 and a 73. They look so similar, don't they? Blade shapes, the handle shapes look similar, but they're not. There is differences. This is just a flat, and it curves out to the little bulbous end, which makes it incredibly comfortable in your hand, because you're wrapping around this to get grip. We have no bars across here to stop you slipping up. So the ergonomics become important when you haven't got something to safeguard you. This is a great knife, a work knife, a just solid work knife. This is different because, look, this is a swell center, and it's got, a wider end here than this has. Look, let me just show you. But this is a swell center, so it's got shape. It comes up, it goes down, it's got shape. It makes this incredibly comfortable in the hand. But what enhances this one more is the jigging, and I know there's not much difference in the jigging. This one sticks in my hand more than this one does because it's sort of been hafted so that there's no peak sticking up. This still has a few rough peaks and it really grips in my hand. In a wet day, I would rather have this in my hand. So there you go. Somebody who works outside and works in the wet, maybe this would be a better buy. So that's what that knife maker is going to push, depending on where he lives, where he works. Simple little things, but the drop points, they're so similar. In fact, they're near enough identical. They've different swedges on them. This is a swedge that starts here and goes all the way down. This has a tiny swedge that goes all the way down, but you'd hardly notice it. It starts off thin, thickens out, and back down to the blade. The nail nicks are different. One's bigger than the other, and one's set in a different place than the other one. So it's one company making two knives that are different. And they're different for a reason. So you decide which one you want. Again, that's the knife world. Sorry, I bashed that again. That is the knife world. It's always been subtle differences. And yes, most knives, look, all they do is cut. That's what a knife does. It's not a technical marvel. It cuts. That's what it does. That's what normal people buy a knife for, because they want it to cut in the kitchen. They want it to cut in a building site. They want it to cut when they're doing whittling. So the knives are made around that there. Clip points. What makes this so cheap compared to this? This is mass produced in a factory. So it's the pieces are all cut exactly the same, and it's all clumped together, and it's hafted beautifully. They've really made a super job of it. The blade steel's pretty good on it, and it'll last as long as, well, it'll last probably longer than this. Although this is 01 tool steel in a Damascus pattern. But this one has got the added benefit to me that this is made by a traditional knife maker, by hand. One person designs this and makes it by hand. Everything about this, the Damascus, this wood, this beautiful dyed wood, is gorgeous. This is carbon fibre, gorgeous. But it's just mass produced. The design's been about for years. It's mass produced on a design. Does that make it a copy? Well, yeah. I mean, and all knives to me are copied, because you add something, maybe, this swedge is different than the one you copied it from. It's different. Because how many times can you design a cutting edge? The cutting edge doesn't change much. It's usually got a bit of straight and a bit of belly on most knives. That's it. So the design of the clips, that's a personal choice. And that's why you go to a certain person for, like, I love Ashley Harrison. As a custom maker, a one-man show who makes this knife, he's my go-to for custom, because one, his prices are fantastic. He doesn't try to take the hand. I've never thought, oh, actually, that's too much. Never thought it whatsoever for what I'm getting. GEC is they make traditional knives, but they do it on a factory. It's not just one man. It's usually one man's idea of what the knife's going to be, or how he's going to adapt it from a pattern in the past. Modern knives, there you go, the ZT. What a beautiful drop point blade. But ZT are only in this century. The last couple of centuries, ZT, there we go. It's a drop point. Do you know what I mean? But this one, flicks open. It locks open. It's different in many ways than what... Sorry, I'm looking for a nail nick. It flicks open, but it's a drop point. That blade is the same as that blade. Will do the same as that. Even in size. Let me just show you. There we go. Yes, you get a little bit of a longer blade, but how many times are you going to use that wee bit of blade there compared to that? These will cut equally as well. This is a better slicer. It's not going to have the edge attention of S35 VN, but it's a better slicer. If you know how to sharpen, what the hell? This is the pick for me. I still love this. And this is a gift, but this is one of my prettiest knives. This is one of my, this is just an absolute keeper, because it looks so good. It functions so well. It's easy to hold. It's a beautiful knife. And so is this. So there isn't a big difference between locking knives and knives that don't lock. They're not any more dangerous. Trust me on that. If you learn how to use a knife, I've cut myself less, and by a big majority, less on non-locking knives than I have on locking knives. You become careless when something locks out and flicks open away from your hand. You become more careless. This, you have to concentrate on what you're doing. And that's a good thing, in my opinion, because knives are dangerous. So I don't know whether I'm making any sense now, but they all came from big lump fixed blades. No bend in the middle, it's just solid, it sits there. So people had to make different ones. But if you take it back hundreds of years ago, when knife makers maybe met up when they were going through a different town, I'm sure they called into the blacksmith to see what he was making. And they'd seen what, and he would have maybe knocked up a shape that was a bit different. And then he thought, oh, I think I'll take that back with me and use it. No problem, mate. See you later when you come around. There wasn't an argument. They were just men who were trying to make a living in different towns. If somebody in the same town started making all the same, there wouldn't have been an argument. Just one had to be better than the other to get more sales. That was it. I mean, it's been there for centuries. Is there new blade shapes come along? Of course there is. And in this last, in the middle of the last century, Spyderco came along, and they had a bloody big hole in the middle of the knife. And that was unusual. People didn't do it as such. Not a round hole, because it's very important that the hole's round. But they also done things like they put a clip on it. That was only in the 60s. The 50s, 60s, the clips started to come in. Spyderco put clips on knives. They weren't put on them before. And it was only in the 60s. So we're very, very modern. These sort of knives are incredibly modern. But what do you call that? A leaf? A drop point? Do you know what I mean? This was an unusual shape when it came in. It's fugly. It's fugly, but it's so good. It's so basic. It's a big flat ground. You get a lovely slicey blade and a tip that will do any work you want it to do. Fantastic knives. But it's still just a blade that cuts in a different shape. And aesthetics plays a huge part in us collectors. Look, here's another one. People talk about clones and the Chinese coming in. It's not just the Chinese. We do it as well. We do. A new company starts up making knives. Are they, there's a Chinese company. But look, this was the copy, supposedly, of the Rat one, which is already a budget knife. But the Chinese came up with a one that one-upped it, in my opinion. This was Oz 8. This is 440C. I'd take this steel every day. But the handles were the same. The Ganzo was smaller. It had an axis lock. It was completely different in my eyes. Do you know what I mean? Completely different. But the blades, the shape, everything about it is much the same. But because they put Ganzo on it and not Ontario, that's okay. It makes this less controversial. At the time, they were very controversial. But like everything in the knife world, time moves on. Ganzo make fantastic knives on the budget end. Full stop. Yes, their knives look like some other knives. Yes, there's no doubt about it. They do. And, here's another knife that when it came out, revolutionised. And that's why the Spyderco Para 2 and the Benchmade 940 are such super knives. Look at the shape on this blade. This was different. This came along, it was different. It was made for farmers. It was made for feeling to work, pry, poke and tool. They reinforced that tip. Look at that great tip. It was used as a screwdriver, everything, and still is to this day. And it's 20-odd year old. And people are still buying them in their thousands. Do you know what I mean? Because it's such a good knife. And an axis lock. This was theirs. The axis lock was theirs. And now everybody's using it. But nobody complains because the intellectual property had run out because we determined what time that was. How long before you can have it. So now everybody's doing it. So, the next knives, the shark locks, they're all, there's different locks coming all the time. But are they all the same? Yes, they just, and I'm going to keep coming back to, they just cut. But most blades have been designed hundreds of times by different people. And yet, because we're collectors and we spend so much money on them, Anything that looks something similar to the one you've just bought or whatever, it's nearly challenged all the time. The best knife will sell for the most money. The lesser made and quality will sell to the lower end. And not lower end, for a budget that's affordable for an awful lot of the population, which is, you just want something to do the job. So a £30 knife over a £180 knife, if you haven't got the 180, you're going to buy the budget. And yes, there's going to be things around the world that come in that are clones. This £6 knife, £6 knife with not the best steel in the world, definitely not, probably an 8CR, something around that. But it's a direct copy. But in reality, for me, when you're talking a £6 knife, they can make this knife and everything about it is sadly fantastic. It is such a great copy. But here's another thing. How many football shirts have you got in your cupboard that you didn't want to spend the big money on, so you bought copies when you're at the market on a Saturday morning, or you bought your kids them? We've all bought them. Phones are the most copied of anything and the most widespread throughout the world. All phones were copied from the original sort of phone maker. And that's only recently. And they're all copies of the same thing. They all steal each other's ideas and they put them in. But he who shouts the loudest, makes the best, will get the most sales. It's all about sales. And we argue over some of the most stupid things. If somebody wants to go and buy a £6 knife because that's their budget, leave them alone. Just leave them. You spend £140 on a knife that you need, but leave other people alone. I do not. Cars, anything in life. But we seem to think that, oh my God, the knife world just winds me up at times. Now maybe I'm all wrong, and that's okay. I'm quite happy to be all wrong, but I can live with it. And I'm not condorsing clones. That's wrong. And if you try to sell somebody a clone, you're a criminal. I'm not a criminal. I only bought it. I'm not buying it to sell it. I'm not buying it to trick somebody. I'm buying it because I didn't want to buy it. I bought about 3 Benchmade bug outs and sold them and bought them and sold them and bought them but it's so popular, and I just wanted to spend £6 so that I have it for size reference on my channel. I'm not cheating anybody. Not cheating anybody at all. I bought 3 Benchmades. Bug outs and other ones as well, but bug outs. So that's why I have it. I'm not criminal. I'm buying it from a country who doesn't care. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not affecting Benchmade or Spyderco at all. I don't believe I'm affecting them at all, because if you want to spend £6 on a knife rather than 140, the chances are you weren't going to spend that 140. But I have 3 times. So I have no guilt about buying a £6 one because I just want to show it in a size reference. So I know that gets up people's goat. I'm sorry. That's just me. Most of my life I've just got by. I've always had a wee bit extra. When I played golf, I started off with the cheapest set of golf clubs that I could get. By the time I got down to playing for 3, I played 3 and 4 handicap for years and competition golf. I was changing my clubs once every year, sometimes once every 2 years. I was changing my putter every year for stupid prices, £500 for a putter. People in my club looked at me and said, "Why, Paddy? It's a stick with a flat bit." But it made me feel as if my game was better and my confidence grew because I had it. Do you know what I mean? At the end of my golf, when I stopped playing golf, I put my clubs away. And then a few years ago down the caravan, I thought, I'll have another go at it. I bought a set of clone ones and used them. I was still able to play pretty good golf after years of not playing. And they were just cheap clones. Nobody ever picked me up. "Oh, look at that, Paddy. You're ripping us off. You're ripping off Nike. You're ripping off..." No. You buy what you can afford. And you can buy what you want to give out. Nobody can tell you how to spend your money. And to me, that's it. I buy the more expensive range of the folding knives now and the traditional knives because I want to. I love them. I love seeing the differences. I love feeling the differences. I love to see, how different companies, case, make their clip points, how different clip points can be, how different drop points can be, how different the handles can be. I enjoy that. And I enjoy the innovation of how somebody puts them things together to make a good knife. But don't forget, if you started off in the lower end, there's some people never get out of that lower end. And I hate to think of somebody feeling a fraud and not coming into this community because they've got a lower end knife. That's wrong. That's worse than intellectual property. Making somebody feel like shit because they can only afford a cheap knife. That's crap. Do you know what I mean? That's like driving your Rolls Royce up to my door and say, "Hey, look what I've got. Your little Fiat Uno." Why crap is that? That was just copied off another Italian. No, you wouldn't do it. But somehow, some parts of this community, and they're a small part, but they get on my goat. They really do. High horses are something to be knocked off. Oh dear, this is a rant. I don't know why I'm feeling like this. I really don't know why I'm feeling like this, but I just want people to be a bit more understanding with people who are just coming around and they buy knives for the sake of buying knives. Let them buy it. It's none of your opinion. It's not your money. If you're going to go and put a loaf on their table, and if you think that badly of the knife they bought, buy them a good one and send it to them, rather than criticise and make them feel guilty for what they bought. We've all bought clones. I don't care who you are. You've bought a clone. That's it. Sorry, you have. Full stop. But I'm not going to let people tell me what I can buy and what I shouldn't buy. And I suppose that's what I'm saying. So if you want to be angry or whatever, don't even bother commenting because it'll go right over my head. This is just me. It's my hobby. I'm thoroughly enjoying my hobby. It's going, I've more excitement now recently. We started this little podcast. And by the way, we'd done the podcast the other night. I'm awfully sorry. We lost about half of it. The audio went. We're still learning. It's me and two boys that have never had a YouTube channel. One of the boys has never done videoing like this. We've actually upgraded our material. We've got the Zoom. We've got Zoom now, and we've got the professional side of it, so we'll get better at it. And I have so much excitement for the knife community. But, drop it off a peg or two. All knives look the same. They all come from the past and they've just been adapted and they'll keep being adapted into the next century. But these basic shapes, now I only picked two, but these basic shapes will still be around. Why? Because they're good. Because they've had years, centuries of use and been made. And those old boys that stood on their furnace and an anvil and battered out blade shapes, just think how intelligent and how creative were they compared to modern knife makers even who don't have. There's very few modern makers now stand at an anvil with a hammer and a bit of metal and make a knife. Very few. And my hat's off to them. Absolutely, charge whatever you like, because that sort of creativity and skill is that's what I really appreciate. And that's why I like the likes of single custom makers like Ashley and lots of others, but also the companies who are making traditional knives. Now, they don't make a huge amount. Compared to Spyderco, they're a thorn. They're not even a thorn. They're a pebble underneath a shoe to something like Spyderco. They're never going to threaten them. But for me, I now prefer them than I do to the ZTs and Spydercos. The bucket to me is it's a traditional sort of knife, but it's just a locking version of slip joints. They all are. They're locking versions of slip joints. Slip joints started it. In fact, they didn't, because these started it. These started it. These are what built countries, what built unions, whatever. These are the things that started it. So there you go. Was that a rant? I don't know whether it was a rant or not. I just want people, instead of looking for the similarities in a knife when it comes out, oh, that blade shape looks like this, that blade shape, look for the differences. And that's what makes the knife to me. Feel the differences, i.e. handle shapes, is the most important part of the knife. especially a knife that you're going to work. The handle shape is more important than the blade or the blade steel. Now, there's a bloody statement, Paddy. But all this argument, that's what I wanted to get across. The handle shape is more important than the blade shape. It's more important than the blade steel, because if you can sharpen, it doesn't matter much. The tiniest wee bit, it will cut if you can sharpen it. But the handle will make the whole difference in a knife. An absolute difference. And look at the different handles I've got here. And yet these are all comfortable. Otherwise I wouldn't have them. This is one of my newest. I'd never had a copperhead. Never had one. And I got this and I couldn't believe how comfortable it was in my hand. And I could sneak up, much like a Delica. Up there, absolutely perfect. Feel completely safe. Completely safe with this in my hand. So here's my one question. Which style of knife has cut you more, locking or traditional? So I'm going to leave it with a nice friendly question and go and have a cup of tea, and I'm going to chill. I've got this wee cup of tea is near done. But there's the question for today. Which knife have you cut yourself more with, a traditional or a locking? Thanks very much for listening. If you've stuck to the end, by gosh, you're good. Take care, everybody. Paddy's away. And I'm not uptight. I genuinely love having little chats like this. And I don't mean to upset anybody or offend anybody. 100%. I do not want to offend anybody, but I just want to chill out, boys. Let's enjoy the hobby. If you want to spend £500 on a knife and somebody down here thinks you're crazy, he doesn't have to tell you you're crazy. But you might be. But just enjoy. And the same as you're up here, you don't have to tell somebody down here that he's wrecking the knife community, because that's a lot of twaddle. Everything in this world has been cloned, and you have bought them at some stage. I don't condone buying them, but if you want to, for whatever your reason is, you know what I mean? Never try to sell one off. That is breaking the law to me. And the law of just, if you're trying to trick somebody and breaking that, that is your problem. You have a major problem. Don't do it. There you go. Paddy's away for a wee cup of tea, and I'll speak to you again. I think I've said that 3 times now. Bye-bye now.